The challenge, the opportunity to connect. The 1960s, a time of imagination and change, a time of anger and fear. The 1960s, a program called Challenge.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Looked at our connections, our divisions, through the lens of faith. Nearly 60 years later, during these challenging times, we'll take a new look at our divisions, our connections, in a new program called Challenge 2.0. Legislation, the creation of laws, reflects choices, and those choices in turn reflect values. With the 2021 session of the Washington State Legislature now history, how much did faith communities succeed in translating their values into the choices made by legislators? That's the subject of today's edition of Challenge 2.0, Translating Values into Action. So as we seek to get some perspectives on this question, if you joined us a bit earlier this year, we had two wonderful guests that could give us that perspective from the faith community and how that either matches up or doesn't match up in terms of the legislative action that is happening in Olympia. So I'm very pleased to welcome back Lise DeGoyer and Paul Benz, both from FAN, the Faith Action Network here in Washington State. Paul and Lise, thank you so much for joining us again.
Good to be here, Jeff.
Thanks for having us.
Just give us a little bit of background again on Faith Action Network and the constituent groups that make up that network.
Faith Action Network is a statewide, multi-faith inspired advocacy and social justice organization. And we are just celebrating our 10th anniversary in June of this year. We started in the merger of two organizations, the Washington Association of Churches and Lutheran Public Policy, 10 years ago to become FAN. And at that point, the founding board decided to become interfaith, to say that we are much stronger together and how can our faith traditions come together to work for social justice. So our tagline is a partnership for the common good, and we work to define that with Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Sikhs, Unitarians, Quakers, and people of faith and conscience.
So I guess that leads us into the question. The Washington State Legislature wrapped up its session this past April. I guess one of the reasons that it will go down in history, if for no other reason, and I know it was a very active session, was that it was virtual. From your perspectives, how did that work out? How much of it was virtual? Did people meet masked and in person at all? How did that work out?
Thanks, Jeff. Yes, we have learned how to adapt, and I think the Washington State Legislature and its leadership adapted quite well. This was a several months undertaking, as we recall. If we go back into the brief history of COVID, it literally ended. I can remember how the 2020 session ended, and they were hustling to get the business done because mid-March of 2020, COVID was here. Mm-hmm. So they had the months. I mean, obviously they didn't start planning on March 20th, but they were in the fall very serious about this is not going to stop the wheels of state government. And if it's not going to stop it, and we can't turn the normal wheels in terms of the process, how are we going to do that? And I think it came off spectacular. The way, if you, for the viewers who did take in some through TVW is a treasure that we have, like C-SPAN at the federal level. Mm-hmm. And TVW needs to be commended as well. To more specifically address your question, Jeff, there were a handful of legislators. We have 147, 98 in the House, and 49 in the Senate. There were a handful during the floor votes and debates. No committees were physically present. Those were all remote.
Mhm.
Testimony was remote. Practically, there were a handful of staff there on the Capitol campus, but we all know there was a fence put up because of the horrible incidents that happened commensurate with what happened at our nation's capital, happened at our state capitol in Olympia on January 6th. So that's, I'll just say this to wrap up my response to you, is that I think in many ways, democracy with a small d was expanded and more engaging with this remote session. And I think you can prove that particularly by looking at how many people signing in on a bill. I'm opposed, I'm neutral, I'm supportive of it more than ever that I remember, sometimes depending upon the bill.
My other question is, we hear so much, and much perhaps for public consumption, of the divisions. Do you get the sense that the fact that it was virtual exasperated the divisions or actually helped alleviate some of those?
I think one wonderful outcome, to add to what Paul said, is that people in our network from Central Washington and Eastern Washington could participate when they're not usually able to come in person to our advocacy days, like Paul said, to testify or to sign in. As far as divisions, I think if you have that insight through TVW to some of the proceedings, if you have a new perspective on how people are proceeding with the bills or opposing the bills, I think it could help. I have no evidence to show this yet, but I think it can help people see that it's a difficult job to govern, and people are working very hard at it.
Your question, Jeff, is about, if I understand it correctly, about whether this process furthered the divide or narrowed the divide. And I don't know that it necessarily did either of those. Our political divisions in this country from the beginning of the country, are innate. The human community has differences of opinion. Those get exacerbated from time to time in our country, and we are in one of those times of deeply divided as a country, and that goes all the way from the very top to the national community, so to speak, to our state and to the local communities, right? I don't know that this process or the successes that took place narrowed that divide any. But I don't think the divisions were any more greatly exacerbated, right? That there were further divisions. It all depends upon your perspective. You can say, oh my God, it was a horrible session. Look at all the deeply division that there was. But when you tuned in and listened, sharp debate, sharp meaning in terms of divisive, but it was respectful, and the process took place. The majority party got several prizes, so to speak, and we move on from there.
So I guess my next question, and you led into it very nicely, is to both of you, what is your overall assessment? What, from your perspective of Faith Action Network, constituted the biggest successes that led you to celebrate or feel good about your work?
Well, I would follow up on what Paul said, which was just really helpful from an inside perspective. As more of the generalist for FAN, a takeaway for me as I watch proceedings was we don't get very far when we work out of our fear. So as I heard the fear of what a capital gains tax would do to our economy, I really will be surprised to see those fears come to pass of the wealthiest, people in our state leaving because of this new tax that will touch so few people, but will make a difference. And I think what it affirmed, and perhaps that's because we were aligned with so many of the things that passed, is that we just need to speak our values. We just need to lift up our values in the public square and be clear about those values and pursue those relentlessly, persistently. We won't always win, right? We won't always have a success, but we will have the integrity of pursuing our values. And that's what I feel good about Faith Action Network, working wherever those values that are inspired by our faith traditions lead us to the common good, lead us to more people being fed. The other takeaway, I think, would be the virtual setting allowed more people who are impacted by the bills to be part of the process. And so in a couple of the bills that I witnessed, and there are many others that this would apply to, but the police reform bills that Paul can talk about, those successes, amazing successes, were driven by the families impacted by police violence. The community and technical colleges win for everybody across the state was driven by community college students who spoke eloquently, were deeply engaged, and inspired all of us. So speaking to values.
When you think about who FAN is, which that's the perspective that you're coming from, obviously the capital gains, Senate Bill 5096 was a huge. We've been, this state has had the worst tax structure in terms of who pays for it, right? In terms of our state budget, at the state level, in terms of state taxes. So that was a big, and we've been working on that for many, many years, and working the choir, if I could use that word, was a considerable choir. And of course, there was an opposing choir. But we were, and it was a big honor to be able to be at that public bill signing. The governor has just done a handful of public bill signings. And so the corollary bill, in some ways, to the capital gains bill is, and of course it will be contested. It's already been, the judicial case has been filed in Superior County Court in Douglas County. The other one would be the working families tax credit. And so this parallels the EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit, and much in terms of the tax base helping being more fair, being more equitable, and the working families tax credit being more fair to the to those families that are working and are struggling. And it particularly helped the undocumented community that is working and paying into our economy. So those were, I think, two really huge wins, and we were able to celebrate that. And the difference, I didn't say the difference, is that the working families tax credit was a strong bipartisan. When you take a look at the votes, completely opposite from the capital gains, because it was a tax credit versus a tax.
So what about, you had mentioned briefly some of the policing reform. We had private prisons that were part of it, the HEAL Act. What is your perspective of the difference that those can make going forward? Because I believe, you were involved and supportive of each of those.
Police reform, I'm pausing because of the great pause or reckoning, whatever word you want to describe, that has been going on in this country in a significant way. The anniversary is coming up on George Floyd's death. And it has in many ways consumed this country, and I believe will continue to consume it. Because as Elise mentioned, you have the impacted family's voice. It was so beautiful because of the perspective that we take on this, to see the voice, having been involved for over a year in a direct way for FAN with the WCPA, the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability, which is led by families, probably 20 families, and there'll be a public bill signing in Tacoma, and they will be front and center. And it is that is so significant in terms of the impact as you're trying to create the change that we want to see. I think most people don't want to see what they saw in terms of Minneapolis, right? In terms of the institution we know as law enforcement, our men and women in blue, so to speak, and the great respect that institution has carried in our country, and to one degree or another always will. But now it has had more light shined on it than ever before in terms of the fractures and the injustices, systemic injustices, racial injustices within that institution, as there is in every institution. And these bills go a long way to help correct that. There's still a long ways to go. It was great to see that voice present on another Capitol Hill in the other Washington a couple of weeks ago, as the Justice and Policing, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act that we're staying abreast of and supporting in the United States Senate right now. The private detention bill, we believe will, as closing down, prohibiting private detention in the state, whether it be at the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma or wherever it be, will provide more transparency in terms of public funding, which public funding does. Private funding, private institutions, you don't always get to be going on the inside. We tried to take a couple of tours of faith leaders, and it was quite a process to get in. We were able to get in several years ago, and other groups were as well, elected officials. So we are very glad to be able to see the larger immigration structure, of which the NWDC, the Northwest Detention Center, is a small but significant part of, to be changed and effective. Now, the implementation of the bill is still to be carried out. And the HEAL Act is, I think, a great step. Just close with that, Jeff, is a great step towards, again, the reckoning and the recognition that for decades, how our communities of color have been horribly impacted and their health by the environment and the way that we've abused our environment. So that was another big debate, along with House Bill 1091, the Clean Fuels Standards Act.
I think you mentioned your website, and I, from having gone there several times myself, obviously we can't, in the space of this conversation, go in depth, and it's a great resource to any of you out there watching that. I mentioned just as we were joining together, I said, well, the legislative session is over. Do you have time to relax now? And you both chuckled. And so I guess my next question would be, what do you and where do you plan to concentrate your efforts next? And what, in fact, are you doing right now?
Thanks, Jeff. That's a good question. And it really leads from what Paul just explained about where those bills take us, because in the FAN umbrella, which is 160 faith communities across the state, thousands of individuals, some who are more engaged than others, there's a wide spectrum of beliefs, right? Of how you make change. And we do seek to be a pretty broad umbrella. So there are people for whom the bills that we celebrate haven't gone far enough. So there's more work to be done. What are the pieces of police reform still missing? What are the pieces of addressing climate change that we still need to do? But when we started this session, did we ever think those 4 bills or those police reform bills would be signed? Did we ever think that there would be, a ban on private prisons in our state? That was a huge pie in the sky belief, and all the steps that were needed to address looming and short time to address climate change. What we do next is take those things that we have worked on and built on and build some more. We listen to our network every spring in our spring summits and hear how they felt things went. And we will hear those upcoming summits. We will hear some who are delighted and some who are like, well, we didn't go far enough. We compromised on this thing. And you just have to hold all that in tension and move towards the prize, as we were talking about before. So keeping that space for what's next for economic justice, for criminal justice, housing and homelessness. These are the broad areas that we were talking about before. The environment, civil rights, immigrant rights, and healthcare. Those, I don't think that we would do much outside of those categories we've been working in for a long time now. When we talk about the capital gains tax, when we talk about the working families tax credit, that's decades of work. That's over 10 years of work. And you just keep looking at, well, what didn't pass, or what's the next good step?
You referred to the fact that there's considerable diversity, within faith communities. Do you find, as you continue to work and as you have some of these follow-up meetings, that some of the faith communities that are perhaps not as invested or interested in some of the issues that are near and dear to the great majority of your membership are beginning to perhaps be persuaded or to come together and join with others, seeing where that does have a foundation in their basic values?
I think we're still growing. And I think people who haven't taken action with us previously will say, oh, they were part of helping make that happen. And we never claim, that we did it alone. We always do this in coalition, in collaboration. So I think we evolve as the national conversation evolves, as a statewide and local conversations evolve. One thing we are looking towards in the year ahead is that we started with regional organizers this year. And we really think that is where the energy is, to connect with people, with people in their own area, to come together and say, what can we do locally, and how does that fit in on a statewide level?
So I guess my closing question, because unfortunately we have, only so much time for this, is people that are motivated individually, what can they do to have an impact on this? What do you recommend to them if they're watching right now and saying, how can I reach out to FAN, or how can I make my voice and my opinions count? What do you recommend?
Well, first, I would recommend that they go to our website and sign up for our emails. We're so email driven. To be able to be statewide, we have to be a bit remote and a bit email driven. Knowing that someday we're going to come visit all our favorite towns and connect with people again. We invite people to come to our summits, to cluster gatherings in the fall as we have them. That's our 160 faith communities divided into 21 geographical clusters, to come to our annual dinner and celebrate everything that's happened in the year past, to make a donation, to invest in the well-being of your state by investing in advocacy, which can create change beyond what we do in our backyards, or what we do by our wonderful direct services. And come to Advocacy Day next year, 2022. We will have them in Eastern Washington, Central Washington, and in Olympia, hopefully in person. Paul, what would you add to that?
It's so important to, for those that really want to get engaged, to meet with their elected officials. And that's quite easy to do. You just need to enter your foot in the water, into those waters. And most folks don't want to put that foot in the water for a variety of reasons. But if there are people that are interested in diving deeper, FAN's always in the midst of doing that to one degree or another. We're in the midst right now of working with one of our faith communities in terms of immigration at the federal level. So we're always, and you get speaking of time, you get this amount of time if you count from 10:30 to wherever we're at now with your elected official, and that is, no matter what your attitude is towards government, towards Olympia, it is your chance to interact with your elected official, and FAN can help plan it to one degree or another.
And and then it's no longer just a name on the ballot that you receive. It's somebody you've interacted with and you have that personal sense.
We don't have to wait till next February's advocacy day. We could do it next week.
Well, one thing I would like to do is invite both of you back here prior to the next legislative session to talk about some of the key issues that you see coming up that you want people to be aware of and that you plan to act on yourself. So I hope we can put that on your respective calendars in advance. And thank you so much for joining us again. And to all of you watching out there, you've heard some very good tips and guidance for taking the opportunity to become more involved in the issues that affect us all. Thank you again for joining us on this edition of Challenge 2.0. We hope you'll join us again next week.
If you've enjoyed this program, found our conversations to be informative, entertaining, and thought-provoking, and the vision inspiring of people from different backgrounds who can disagree without being disagreeable, perhaps you might consider supporting our program with a contribution. Your support will not only help our program continue, it will also support the broader efforts of Paths to Understanding, our supporting parent nonprofit organization.